So last week, we began our webinar with a little bit of a conversation around the idea that the holidays are just sort of immersed in nostalgia. Everything is geared to memories and looking back. And so with that message of um, what the culture presents, what the culture throws at us, and how we have to feel like the need to live into that. Faye and I talked about co-created narratives. So, with that said, this evening we will be talking about family, and so feel free to put your questions in the box as we go in the chat box. Also, I think there's one other thing. Yeah, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention, and that is that a few people suggested to Faye and I that we put in the chat box a link to our donation button. So, because we've been asked, we are going to do that, but please do not let that stop you from attending. That is, please raise the volume. Please raise the volume. All right. All right. I raised my volume a little bit on my microphone. Is that better? I got a thumbs up on that. Okay, good. So, because we were asked about that, I just want to be transparent, is we are not yet a 501c3 not-for-profit. We are certainly considering that and checking all of our different ways that we could do that and make it so that it's available to as many people as easily as possible. So we are looking at that, but we are a completely volunteer organization. So it does, anyone who's willing to donate, would like to help us with all of the expenses that come our way, please know how grateful we are for you to think about that. So, Faye, I think I will take over the letting people in the next few minutes and let you begin, and I'll watch the doorbell.
Okay, great. Good to see you all. Welcome. Yeah, during the holiday season, we often hear about the importance of staying focused on the true meaning of Christmas, and I just can't resist doing the same thing. But I'm not going to focus so much on the familiar criticism of commercialism and busyness of the season, which actually I kind of enjoy. Instead, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the adult version of Christmas in contrast to the child's version of Christmas. And I'm going to be talking about this, and I know we have people from a variety of faith perspectives, and I just happen to come from a Christian perspective. But if you can translate this maybe into your own tradition, your own spiritual practice, how we think about it as adults rather than children. For estranged parents, the child's version of the holiday may not help us very much. It doesn't help me very much. The focus on the mystery and the magic of Santa Claus and the opening of gifts on Christmas morning and children's Christmas pageants, they all have their place, but they tend to be a reservoir of nostalgia rather than a recovery resource for parents. I mean, I went to church this morning, and at the very beginning of the service is a video with somebody singing about Christmas and a father and his 7-year-old daughter. And that's the entire message and opening presents. I'm not sure that helps people like me very much. So I have found help by thinking more about what's the adult meaning of the holidays. And maybe this will jumpstart your own thinking. I want to begin with a story about a French poet named Placide Cappeau. And when Placide was 8 years old, he was playing with a friend, and unfortunately they'd gotten hold of a gun that accidentally went off, and it shot Cappeau in the hand. And as a result, his hand had to be amputated. We don't know how the accident specifically affected Capoe, but we know from studies of children undergoing amputation that they are at risk of developing depressive disorders and feelings of loss, self-stigma, self-loathing, and difficulties in coping, especially if it was induced by an accident or a blast. So he has a permanent disability, but in spite of that, Capoe went on to be a writer. And roughly 35 years later, Capoe would pen one of the most performed of all Christmas carols, O Holy Night. And my favorite lines of that carol are the third and fourth ones. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. I love that. Till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. For Capoe, who likely dealt with a lifelong tendency to feel defective and self-doubting, his carol reveals what an adult Christmas meant to him, a fresh opportunity for his soul to feel its worth. And it's notable for me that in a season which often feels like a threat to our sense of worth, especially as estranged parents, Capoe saw it as a time when his soul felt its worth. And does your soul, does my soul, feel its worth in this season? So perhaps it's more important to think deeply about the Christmas story. In reality, it is a collection of mishaps. However romantic, picture, idealized view of it we have, the way it's staged, is a collection of mishaps. A young couple who nearly broke off their engagement because of a questionable pregnancy persevere, they get married anyway. When the mother's nearly full term, they get a letter from the government ordering them to take a road trip with no regard for the fact that she's late in her term. It's a 90-mile trip. It would have been grueling, much of it on foot. Would have probably taken a week or more. And when they arrive, they can't find a place to spend the night. No vacancy signs abound. So they camp out in a stable. And of all the luck is during the night, this night, that the mother goes into labor. And yet, we are told it was into this collection of mishaps that God was born into the world. Parental estrangement is often develops as a collection of mishaps rather than a single event. Now, there are single event estrangements, but often it is what Kelly refers to as this reconciliation estrangement dance that develops over time. And a bunch of things go wrong. And when we hit this collection of mishaps in our lives, I find we're tempted to do one of three things. We internalize it as a defect. There must be something wrong with me, that all these bad things are happening. We externalize it as we get mad at someone, or we give in to despair. Life doesn't mean anything. And in each case, it may be hard for us to believe that God can be born into our situation in a way that we feel our worth. But this actually is the Christmas story. The message of Christmas is that God enters the world because the world is worth saving. God enters every life because every life is worth saving. And as estranged parents, whatever our situation, whatever our flaws, every parent is worth healing. And this is what we say in Peak all the time. Everyone deserves to recover. And I think God agrees with that. And I think that's at the heart of the Christmas story. Every estranged parent deserves to sleep at night. Every estranged parent deserves compassion. Every parent deserves to feel loved. And every estranged parent deserves to have a life worth living. And every parent deserves to be able to move forward in their lives. The anger, I'll talk about this for a moment. The anger that some of us feel in this season has a purpose. It's like gasoline in an engine. Anger can be the emotional fuel that propels us forward into our lives with purpose and zest. It helps us say, my life is worth saving, darn it. Now, like gasoline, anger can be explosive and damaging. As someone said, it's one thing to become angry, it's another to live angry. Living angry simply makes us sick. Another way of saying it is that anger makes a great fuel, but it's a poisonous food. And we don't want to feed our anger. So we want to use the energy, if we're feeling a lot of anger this season, to see it as an energy pushing us to reinvent our lives, because our lives are worth saving. As we say in Peak, by learning that we deserve to play and have fun, we discover or rediscover sources of joy and happiness. And we do this because our soul feels its worth. And that is the central message of Christmas. Now, when it seems everything has gone wrong, we also may be tempted to give up in despair, as if life is just one tragedy after another, no one cares. And I'd like to observe that people do care. In the original Christmas narrative, there are no other family members mentioned in the birth accounts. The people who brought assurance and affirmation, total strangers. Shepherds, wise men, whatever. The list was expanded over the years to include oxen, sheep, and a little drummer boy. But it raises the question, are we willing to be comforted and reassured by folks who are not family in that narrow sense of the word? Do we discount the love of others that are brought into our lives? Imagine if Mary and Joseph said to the shepherds, you don't count, you're not family. So I'd say for each of us, there are strangers that aren't family, that are a part of how God brings love into our lives. Strangers are highly regarded in the New Testament. The Good Samaritan who showed the love of God to a man who'd been beaten, left for dead, was a stranger. Think of the words of Jesus. I was a stranger, you welcome me. Or the words from another part of the Bible. Don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. And the word angel simply means messenger. So sometimes an important message of God's love comes from a total stranger if we're open to receive it. And I guess the final thing I'd say is you can't separate the meaning of this season from what we talked about last week, the encroaching darkness and the shortness of days. Just as anger can be helpful, there is a helpful, subdued mood that can set in this time of year that's spiritually important. When our energy starts to be reduced, it reduces our inclination to try and control what we can't control, and we finally give up. And we don't give up on life, we give up on controlling, because we just don't have the energy to do it anymore. I understand it's dangerous to try and save a drowning swimmer until they give up and stop fighting. So too, we must give up in a positive way when we move forward with our lives. And as long as we think we're alone and are in control of the relationship with our strange adult child, we can't recover. In that sense, a subdued mood may be helpful. It says, I don't have the energy to do this anymore, to try and fix this or figure out what happened. As long as we don't give up on ourselves, as long as we continue to let our soul feel its worth. So those are some thoughts about an adult version of Christmas. I'm sure that folks from other faith traditions could provide other insights. But I think it is important for us to move in our thinking about this out of just the child's version, which has its place. The Apostle Paul wrote, when I was a child, I talked like a child, thought like a child, reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Faith, hope, love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So I'd just like to suggest that we join Mary and Joseph in their collection of mishaps and calamities. We keep an open heart to the love of God streaming toward us. And we're going to see all kinds of messages, like Kelly said, that are going to focus only on the fact that this is about parents and children and family. But there's something deeper here. And so we need to be open to welcoming the shepherds as they appear, the smiles on strangers' faces and the clerks and the wait staff and yes, other people on this meeting tonight. whom we may never have met before, but they're here. And just their presence and showing up is an expression of love and reassurance that we are not forsaken. And so we can join that poet, Pasa de Capo, who, though missing a hand, like we're missing a piece of our hearts, we have a disability that's like a lost limb. And we live with that. But we live courageously, and we live knowing that we are loved and that our soul is of worth and that we are worth healing. And I think that adult version is what I would like to suggest we consider in this season. That's what I got, Kelly. I've got some other steps later on if we have time I can talk about, but let's take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, Faye. So with the whole thought of family being so prominent right now, it's amazing to me that people who are not in that idealized situation aren't speaking up. They're not talking to their pastors, and they're not talking to other people who make it seem so ideal. And yet there are a lot of people out there who don't mind telling you you used the wrong pronoun when you spoke to me. And so we are constantly bombarded with this lack of sensitivity, and the idea that we have all kinds of relationships is forgotten. Our culture has idealized marital relationships and sibling relationships and parent-child relationships and child-grandparent relationships. They're idealized, and so we never seem to get any of the messages through about the pain that comes when these are broken. No recognition. A pastor, maybe 20 years ago, Faye, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe 20 years ago, a pastor was brought up short if they celebrated Mother's Day or Father's Day without recognizing the people who were not privileged to have those relationships. But we don't yet, this many years down the road, seem to be able to recognize that there are other relationships, and they're broken and they're hurting people. So, I did a quick overview of family shows, and I looked from 1951 through 2006. So that's a pretty broad brush. And in 51, I started with looking at I Love Lucy, and up through 2006. I don't know if anyone ever saw that 70s show, but those of us who were raised in the 70s found that to be a pretty interesting show, and we could laugh at ourselves. But it really showed up that in all of these programs, these families were almost perfect. My husband will say, Mom, Dad, Buddy, and Sis. That's how it all goes. Mom, Dad, Buddy, and Sis. And then you think about things like the Cosby Show. They'll give you a little peek at a crack somewhere, some little thing goes wrong, but within 30 minutes they have the perfect end, and they're all mended and everything worked out really well. And I'm here to tell you, as a licensed marriage and family therapist, that's not what's happening out there. And on the other side of it, when we look at the other side of it, the dysfunctional families, those shows about dysfunctional families don't do anything to normalize the idea that family life is complex. Like, okay, so they're dysfunctional. We'll recognize there are dysfunctional families, but they're so complex. And in these settings, I've noticed that the dysfunctional families tend to be vilified, or they're caricaturized of a dysfunction that just totally distorts the reality and shows only the extremes of dysfunction. You know, I have, my argument about The Sopranos is they didn't change our idealized version of family. I think if anything, they strengthened the idealized version of family because this is so horrible. This is not the way people should live, and yet they do. Um, when you think about some of the other dysfunctional families we've seen uh, on the show, The Simpsons, Family Guy, Bates Motel, Shameless, those dysfunctional families, um, it's all to the extreme, and there's not a recognition of the ripple effect that goes out into other pieces of the family from this dysfunction. So these are really narrow definitions of family. They're extreme on either end, and they really, in my opinion, they don't capture the bulk of American families. So the one of the things that I want to be able to share from that is we're all Americans are looking to place fault all the time. Whose fault is it? How did this go wrong? Who's accountable for this? And of course, this is not a surprise to anybody who's been estranged that most times the parents are the ones who are found to be at fault. If you ask the general population, the answer is, well, it's got to be something wrong with the parents, something they did wrong, and it's up to them to fix it. Well, I'm not in agreement with that. What I will say is you're not broken. Your kids aren't broken. The dynamic between the two of you is broken. And that's where the mismatch comes. That's where the pain comes, is trying to be understood, trying to be heard, trying to understand what has happened. There's not much research into this, but there is one piece that I find fascinating, and that is when parents who have been estranged are asked, or when kids who have estranged their parents are asked, have you told your parents why you're doing this? 67% of them will say, yeah, yeah, I've told my parents. And yet when we ask parents on the other side of that, has your child told you why this is happening? 66% of estranged parents say no. There's a mismatch there. There's a dysfunction there. And it's not the parents' fault. It's not the kid's fault, but the dynamic, something's gone wrong in that communication piece of it. So what I wanted to talk about with that is that perfection's not the goal. We're not going to get to perfection like these shows, these extremes that they show. But I wanted to talk about, at this time of year, the role of our spirit in recovery. Um, like Faye said, there's a lot of faith families out there, and I too come from the Christian perspective. But the role of spirit in recovery is to help us get back in touch with what enlivens us. Without without spirit, if you think about it, we are just merely biological beings living a biological existence. If you take the spirit out, that's what we are, is biological. And so I like to think of it as biology and the spirit team up. Biology drives us to reproduce, and spirit drives us to love that new little spirit. And parents spend years nurturing this little spirit until it is also driven by biology and spirit to create more little spirit, little souls. But parents no longer play the same role in the lives of their children, and they might discover that they haven't nurtured their own spirit. And boy, that part of us goes dormant. Some people call it empty nest syndrome. Used to be our kids stuck around home because they would learn our trade, or they were going to be working alongside us, and those days are so far gone. And what's left is relationship. That's what we need to work on, and that's where the dynamic goes awry. So our spirit really needs to re-enliven us during this stage of life. And for many, grandchildren play a part in that. If you've had grandchildren come into your life and been fortunate enough to have them for any period of time, I would dare say that most people who have experienced that will tell me that it was a whole new chapter for them, that they just didn't realize there was a part of them that was dormant. And when those grandchildren were born, they just had this real kick in their spirit. And so when your adult children estrange you, it isn't just your relationship with that child or children that's broken. It's or just at that time disconnected. It's with grandchildren as well. And even if you never got to meet your grandchildren, knowing that they're out there and that you have not ever had the chance to embrace them is also a loss. So at this time of the year, thinking about what parts of your spirit could you be nurturing? What hasn't been nurtured? Um, is it your creativity? Is it your social self? Is it your active self? Is it your spiritual self as far as how you practice your faith? You might have lost touch with your spiritual self. And so for some people, getting in touch with their spirit happens in the church pew. For others, it happens in the ocean. For others, in the woods or in social justice work. These are some of the places that people will tell me they are dealing with the divine in their life. That's where they meet the divine. And so many of the parents that I work with have lost touch with that, or they've lost drive. And I was listening to an interview with Margaret Atwood this week, and she said something that I thought was interesting. And I had never thought about it before, but she said, if you have hope, you do something. If you have hope, you do something. And so that is worth thinking about, because being stuck in this paralysis does not feed our soul. And so relationships in and of themselves, in to my way of thinking, are a spiritual endeavor. We click with certain people. We might call them kindred spirits. Christians speak of a personal relationship with God. Other faith traditions relate to their divine via prayer and ritual. Relationships are an expression of our spirit. And we have lots of folks out there that we can have relationship with. And I don't mean to even imply that it will ever replace what we had with children. But there's certainly another place for that energy to go that will help enliven our own spirit. Research tells us that spiritual well-being is linked with physical and mental well-being, and they're linked pretty tightly. If we want to be in a state of well-being, our spirituality needs to be tended to, whatever that might be for you. This means, we also acknowledge that we want the same thing for our children, even if at this current moment they believe that their well-being is best served by estrangement. As a therapist, I would say it is not best served by estrangement, that there's work we could do that would be helpful, but that takes time and effort and energy. And I love doing that work with families. It's very encouraging, but it takes a while sometimes to get all the parties at the table. And so relationship with others who feed us and enliven us is important. It also helps us to be prepared. This may sound strange, but it does help us be prepared for the opportunity to reconcile. There are a lot of things that we experience in relationship that we can learn to do differently, that can be helpful. And that's a whole another set of webinars. But family doesn't always meet all of the criteria at that moment, at this moment in time. And so the work that we are doing at making it work sometimes just doesn't work. We keep trying over and over, and it's the reconciliation reunification dance. It starts out, there might be a short break, and then you come back together. And then there might be a longer break, and you come back together. And this can go on and on for years for people. And it's not working, and that's nothing's changing. So there are other people in the world that can become dear to us. We've heard um, people talk about my other mother or my sister from another mister. Those sorts of relationships that are healthy and supportive for us. And so we end up developing a family of choice rather than a family of chance. And that is effort for sure. It can feel many times, Faye and I have heard people say it feels like you're giving up when you engage in developing these relationships, but it is not giving up on the relationship that you would like to develop with your child. It's keeping you healthy so that when the reconciliation opportunity comes, you are able to engage. Um, so moving forward in any of these ways isn't betrayal, and it isn't giving up on hope. So the last thing that I wanted to share here, and this is I've stolen this from Faye, so he may have some corrective action for me here, but there's 4 things that Faye has said are necessary ingredients for healthy adult relationships. And these 4 things are for any adult relationships. And we would hope one of the moves that we make as our children grow up is we move from a parent-child relationship to an adult-adult relationship. And that is a very different process. And it can be very challenging if you didn't experience it yourself when you were growing up. It's going to be really hard to put it in place. Many of us have heard our own parents say that we're beholden to them forever, or something along those lines, or that we have responsibilities as their children that we are supposed to be living into, and that doesn't work well for people either. So these 4 things that are necessary ingredients for the healthy adult relationship, I'm going to just list them out there, and certainly if you have any questions about those as time goes on, feel free to throw them into the box, asking what that might look like with adult children. But the 4 conditions of relationship with adults is that there's, and I'll list them quickly, but I'm going to talk about each one of them individually, is mutuality, intimacy, gratitude, and commitment. And first one I'm going to talk about is mutuality. And mutuality, this is how I see it in my office. And it may make you chuckle, but it really is something that people tend to believe. And I call it the ledger relationship. And I'm keeping a list over here of all the things I've done for you, and a list of all the things you've done for me, and they're not the same. You owe me. That's not mutuality. That's a tit for tat relationship. And if you're really busy keeping tabs on that, you're not really spending any time developing relationship. So mutuality is a relationship in which the people involved have mutual respect and admiration for what the other person brings to the relationship. Um, are they complementary to you? Do they have strengths where you don't? Can you admire that when you can't do something and they can? Can you admire that and respect that and step back and let them have the space to be that person? And do they allow that for you? So that's the mutuality portion. The second one is intimacy. And intimacy in a relationship is more than anything else. It's about feeling safe enough with the other person to be your true self without any fear of judgment or ridicule, intimacy, being able to admit your faults, your fears, your failures, and know that there's somebody there who's never going to use that against you. Um, the idea that um, somebody could use something against you that you've shared with them is painful. We call that emotional safety. I'll give you a little story about that, in which I had been talking with a couple about intimacy in their relationship and in this emotional safety factor, because it was really, you know, not present. And so the couple I was working with, um, early on, this is what the springboard was for the conversation. They had come in 3 or 4 times and had told me a lot about their relationship. And I was starting to get to the point where I was asking stories that they could tell me about their own life growing up and their marital life. And the the gentleman in the relationship told a story about a time when he was in 6th grade, and he really liked this girl. And one day she um, talked to him just spontaneously. And he was so surprised because this was back in the 70s, and he wore glasses, one of the few kids who wore glasses back then, and they were very thick. And back then we didn't have polycarbonate, so they were thick glasses, made his eyes look really big, and people sort of teased him about it. But this little girl that he liked was talked to him and spent time with him at play what do they call it, playtime, free time, I guess they called it. And so a week or so later, um, he got enough courage up when there was another free time, and he approached her to speak. And when he did, she was with her friends, and she recoiled and she teased and she, what are you talking to me? And in the end, she called him Four Eyes, and he was just devastated. And he told that story in my office to his wife, and she said everything right. She was compassionate, she was caring, she was understanding, and it looked sincere and genuine, and it felt that way too. So 2 weeks later, they came in for their next appointment. And when they walked into the office, you could feel the ice between them. You just knew something had gone wrong. So I asked them when we began, do you want to tell me what's on the table right now? I can tell that there's something that's pretty difficult right now. And he began to tell, he asked, could I tell the story? And she said, sure, go ahead. And he's relating an argument they had about something. And in that argument, it got very heated. And when she got angry, she called him Four Eyes and literally broke his heart. And that's when we began talking about what's emotional safety around intimacy and being able to be honest with people. Um, so the third thing that we're going to talk about, or that we talk about as being a necessary ingredient for adult relationship, is gratitude. And gratitude in a relationship is about recognizing in each other and being grateful for the things in which you are perfectly mirroring each other, as well the places where you differ. Are we grateful for those things? Um, are you always able to be grateful when you differ, or do you walk away muttering criticism and judgment to yourself about the other person? Gratitude is recognizing what the other person has and being grateful for the things when you're perfectly mirroring each other, but also where you differ. And that mirroring is so important. And the my husband was a pastor, and we used to joke about the premarital counseling. He'd say they both came in and say, "How'd it go?" "Oh, it went great. They both love water. They're in love and they're going to stay in love forever." And that was their mirroring. Everything was perfect. And of course, when you're young and in love, that's true. But as time goes by, it's difficult to mirror when we're upset, and that happens with our kids. And they don't see us, and they don't see what as adults we're trying to convey to them, or how we're trying to express love, and vice versa, back and forth. And so it's very hard to have the gratitude. I think the hardest time to do that, uh, as our children start to grow up and pull away, is when they're teenagers. It's really hard to find something to be grateful for with teenagers when they're at their worst. And the last piece is commitment. And commitment is, as I have it here, is when you decide and also live into the idea that your relationship is of utmost importance, and that any amount of effort you need to expend, you will do so to keep it vital. It's worth the energy, that commitment to that relationship. And so as we look at these relationships in our life, developing these things with other people in our life is a great way to begin to look at what that might look like with our adult children, if we're fortunate enough to get the opportunity to be invited into reconciliation. And as we move into the holidays, there may be some other people in your life where these relationships haven't been nurtured or could be nurtured. And so I leave us with the idea that the relationships, as the media presents them to us, are very narrowly defined. We have lots of opportunities with wonderful, beautiful people around us to be in relationship with. And while they will not replace our children, there's no way that we could ever say that that would be an equal replacement. We have a lot to offer the world, and a lot to offer people around you. You have, in each one of you, a uniqueness and a gift that's available to other people out there. And in nurturing that and offering that as a way of your personal and your spiritual growth, also helps in these other ways. So I'll leave you with that this evening. And at that, I'm going to leave us open for questions. I have, let me see. So far, I have, oh, okay, let me go up here. Thank you, Faye. That was beautiful. There's one of your comments in there. Just what I needed to hear, Faye. Thank you. Okay, here's one. Grandchildren. This week, my husband and I met my son, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, our granddaughter, for dinner at a restaurant. We invited them to our house for Thanksgiving, but they chose to meet us at a restaurant. We live 2 hours apart, and my husband and I have been asked to drive to their city for each visit since our granddaughter's birth. Location for the gathering is unimportant, except that our granddaughter has never visited our home. We were hoping that the 3 of them would be able to visit us at our home for Christmas. We learned at the end of this recent visit that our son and his wife plan to visit our home for a 1-day visit at Christmas, but will leave our granddaughter with her other grandmother for the day. They say she does not travel well, and 2 hours is too long for her to be in a car. I feel power and control at play. It is. So I don't have a question. I'm not asking for advice, but that experience certainly doesn't fit the idealized family as everything theme, does it? No, it does not. And that is, was that Danette? I think, yes, that's Danette. Danette, that feels like it must be torture to not be able to entertain that grandchild in your own home. And it's not, it does not surprise me that this is being used for power and control. And I'm going to return to my co-created narrative. That may not be their narrative. they may not see that as power and control. They may see it as something totally different, which is why we get such a disparity in parents and their adult kids understanding about what's happened. Faye, did you have anything that you wanted to say to Danette about that?
I don't, as she said, she's not looking for advice, and I can just share from my own experience. I mean, I think this is really one of the most challenging things that I face as an estranged parent. I mean, this really is the loss of an arm, because I have I didn't just lose relationship with 3 children. I lost 8 grandchildren. It's a little bit like a tragic bus accident, and you've lost 11 people all at one time. You get a phone call, there are 11 people you're never going to see again. And that's really very, very difficult. I mean, the scale of loss for many of us, when you consider not only the children, but the grandchildren. I mean, we're talking about not just 1 or 2, but 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 or a dozen. And that's just a huge loss. And I think that is the loss of my hand. And that's one that I live with, and I think many of us live with. And I think we have to be courageous. That's what I say to myself. Lots of people live without a hand or an arm or a leg, and they do so well. And so I think we have to have courage, and I think we have to make the kinds of choices that will help us live full and productive lives. For me and grandchildren, I've had to take the long view, which is I have put together for each of them and continue to put together letters that I've written them, because I've written a number of books. They're going to get books. I worked in satellite reconnaissance when I was a young man in research. There's a book about that. So I'm collecting things I want them to have after I'm gone. If they live to 18, if I live to the point where they're 18, I will make an invitation to them to get together with them. They may choose to get together with me or not, but that will be their choice. And I feel that I will have done what I can. So I've had to kind of take the long view. I know there are other people who see their grandchildren and are permitted to see their grandchildren, and they have worked out a way to do that. And I think that's terrific. And I'm very grateful for those folks that they have that opportunity. But there are others of us who don't. And, whether it's a power and control issue or something else, in a way, it doesn't matter. It's a huge loss no matter what. And I think we have to find ways to, for me, and I've said this to a brother of mine, when he said, what can I do? I'm like, meet with my grandchildren after I'm gone. He's younger. After I'm gone, and you let them know their grandfather loved them. So that's a part of how I cope.
Yeah. And there's such an invisibility factor there, Faye. Here in the capital region of New York, I don't know if any of you, if you're not from New York, you probably didn't hear about this, but there was, it was 4 or 5 years ago, there was a major limousine accident on the way to a wedding, and there were 20 people in the family were injured or killed. And that made major headlines, and everything was all about the trauma of the loss and the trauma to the family that was left behind. And it was such a big deal. They were calling all of our therapy, centers, counseling centers, asking us what could they do and how could we help them? And yet that happens to parents every day across this country, and you do not hear about it. It happens all the time.
And parents are making brave decisions. We call this peak, right? Parents of estranged adult kids. Recovery is like climbing Mount Everest. It's an internal Mount Everest. And if we had actually climbed a Mount Everest, that might make the papers in our community anyway.
Yeah.
but we're recovering. We're climbing an internal Mount Everest, and we may never get credit for that, but it doesn't matter because it is a heroic thing that we're doing in trying to recover and become the best people that we can. And for me, it's climbing that internal mountain and saying, I'm not going to stay stuck down here at the bottom. I'm going to keep climbing, and I've got folks that are climbing with me.
Yeah.
We have to keep encouraging one another in this journey.
Yes, yes. So we have a question here. We gifted an annual membership to the YMCA to our daughter and her 2 daughters last Christmas. We are paying for it monthly via a credit card debit. I want to ask our daughter if she is using the membership. She has not been answering texts, emails, or phone for almost a year. Any suggestions? While this is really difficult because the boundary has been put in place and it ends up becoming a boundary issue, and what sort of risk are you willing to take? As estranged parents, that you can do something with the very best of intentions and it gets interpreted in the very worst possible way, and nothing at all like what you expected it to be interpreted as. She's not answering anything for almost a year. Let me ask, you can just shake your head if you need to, but does she reach out to you? No, no. So you're not getting anything in either direction. So, this might be one of those things where you end up having to make a decision that about how would you change this if you still want to be able to let them know that you're in touch or you care and that you love them. It may be that you would have to take the route similar to what Faye described, in something that's going to maybe not be so immediate, that it would be down the road.
Forgive me for going back to the Christmas story.
No, that's
I think of the 3 kings and the offerings, right? And I think about my relationship with my children, and anything that I provide, I have to see as an offering. It's gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and I may get nothing back for them. And if and I have to kind of make peace with that, because if I can't give something and be okay, if it's going to be damaging to me, giving it as an offering with no response, then I probably shouldn't be doing it. I probably need to step back and say, for my own self-care, I can't make this as an offering. There will be other things that we can do that will help us feel like at least I'm doing something to express love. And it's an offering. It's just sent out there, and it may even be a burnt offering. But you make your peace with it because you know from the get-go that's what it is. And if you can live with that and be okay, then that's something that I think may be worth doing. But if you can't be okay, probably best not to do. In my experience.
And along the lines of recovery, that is really the model, is can you live with that? And if you can't, then you have to make a different decision, but that would be a goal. Next question is, I have 3 adult children who all have decided they despise me for different obscure reasons. How do I deal with blaming myself when I know that, although not blameless, it is not all my fault? Well, Steve, you are right. It is not all your fault. It is a dynamic. And like I said, it's not 2 people who are broken. It's the dynamic that's broken. And I think the one of the best things I can say to people is, if you're going to walk away from a relationship, whether it's a marital relationship or any relationship, you want to be able to feel like you gave it everything you could. You did everything that you could that was healthy and that was for the good of yourself and for your family. And you can't do more than they'll let you do. And if you've done what you can, you have to remember to tell yourself it's not your fault and believe that. It's very difficult for people to believe that in this culture because you're told it is your fault. Your child's telling you it's your fault. And in the end, it's where it's what's playing in your head that's killing you. It's just so stressful. And I think that Faye and I have said it before in these sort of settings is being together with people who are dealing with the same thing and hearing everybody talking about what's going on and that you're all in the same boat. And it's not your fault. It's not all your fault is helpful. Being in a group that supports and recognizes that as a group, that it is not all our fault. There's power in that. There's power in that. If you're not in a group, Steve, you might want to think about that. Our website has a number of groups, drop-in groups and formal groups that you can join, and that you're welcome. We'd love to have you.
You know,
Okay.
I'm so glad to have Kelly here because that enables me just to be kind of who I am, and she can be the corrective. But we're given a narrative in this culture that we have a group of parents like us in one generation, and we don't listen, and we're controlling, and we're self-centered, pick any list, but we are simultaneously kind of given the idea that there's a generation just below us that it doesn't have any of those problems.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. Yes, yes, we probably don't listen well sometimes. Yes, we probably sometimes are controlling. Yes, we perhaps are too focused on our own perspective on things. The same thing could be said of our children. They probably sometimes don't listen. They probably sometimes need to be in control. They probably sometimes look at things only from their perspective. So from a generational standpoint, I can't believe that we just have a bunch of folks who are older our age and they have all of the problems. And the next generation down has none of them. So Steve, that's a great question. And when I need to reassure myself, that's one of the things that I think about. That my children, all of our children, have issues just like we do. And as in any relationship, if we're going to go anywhere in those relationships, we got to be able to deal with those with each other. I guess the final thing I would say is it helps me just to own my stuff, just to be honest about it. I'm a thinker, I'm not a feeler. So I deal much better with things, you know, at the intellectual level sometimes than at the emotional level. I look back at my parenting. I can own many in other relationships. I can own issues that get in the way. And it helps me just to say, okay, that's me. But I have compassion on myself because God has compassion on me. And because I have other people in my life that also have compassion on me, like Kelly. And so owning the places where I know I'm flawed actually frees me because I don't have to pretend that I don't, but I also don't have to take full responsibility for the experience.
True. True. Yeah, and this goes like right along with this next question is how do we leave the past behind if you do reconcile, which is a requirement by my stepson. Can't ever talk about the past. There's been so much extreme pain in the last 8 years, not being able to see him and the 2 grandkids. Leaving the past behind, that's the wrong thing to say to a therapist. I mean, that's our work is in the past. However, so what I will what I'll say to, and I hear this in my office, we couples will come in and they'll say, we want to leave the past behind. We want to start over. How do we do that? And I said, so if you start over, you're going to do the same thing again. Because we do. That's who we are. And so leaving the past behind is basically what my impression from the years I've been doing this with families is that somebody has come to the understanding that this is a mutual problem and I don't want to have to admit it in an office with a therapist or not. And I don't want to do it with you either. Let's not talk about that stuff. And part of that's also because of the pain. The kids are hurting too. They want parents. That reconciliation dance kind of shows you, yeah, they want the parent. They don't want the parent. They want the parent. And so it's if it's required that you can't ever talk about the past, it makes you're almost doomed to failure, because if you can't talk about what went wrong and how do we fix it, then you're not going to be able to move forward with any permanence. So one of the things that I tell parents, and I learned this from a doctor friend of mine, is if you break a bone and it heals well, that part of your bone is actually stronger than other parts of your bone. And it's the healing that makes the difference. And so I will tell, when I'm working with estranged families, what I will say is, if we can work through this difficulty, you are stronger in the end. If you've ever experienced it with a partner and you've had an argument and you're able to work through it successfully, in the end, your relationship is stronger. So that makes it really hard to do. And I'm wondering if there are other boundaries that have been put on you, Sue. It sounds like, is this the only boundary, or are there other rules of engagement that you have to follow? I can't hear you, Sue. Let's see if I can. All right.
Oh, my husband, he put them on my husband, John.
Okay.
And one of them is, if they were to talk again, they couldn't talk about the past period.
Okay. If they were to talk again. Okay. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks.
So so when you have a boundary like that, you have to decide, is that a boundary one you can live with, or how do you want to deal with that? There's so many things, man. If that was in my office, I would be having all of these questions about why that would be for somebody. And it's usually to avoid pain. Let's not talk about anything painful or hurtful. The good thing about that is, if we talk again, sounds like there's an option, and that they would consider it, which is good. I'm sure that's hopeful. But the other part of that is sort of putting limits on, how you're going to engage around that. And so that might be where you would be talking about what you need in that relationship. How do you need to engage in that for your own health?
Kelly, I think for me, an aspect of the question is trust. How do you rebuild trust?
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot rebuild trust in an instant. We can, I'm a trainer. I can train people to do lots of things in one day. I can't train people how to build trust in a day.
True.
Trust takes time. And that requires, there are needs on both sides of that. So what worries me sometimes about estranged parents is there's a kind of desperation that if a child comes back to them, it's like, good, great. And they're so grateful that they are unable to say, now, this is going to take time to rebuild the trust. And I'm willing to work on that, but here's what I need from you in rebuilding that trust. And it probably will require the help of a therapist. But I think the issue of how to rebuild trust, and as estranged parents, if that moment comes, to be ready to say, this is going to take time. I'm willing to put in the effort and the time, but it's going to be a process of rebuilding trust, because I need to have some assurance that I'm not going to put myself out there again to be estranged, because my own well-being as a person will be severely compromised if I go through this again.
Mhm. Yeah. And that trust is probably the scariest thing to have to ask for, because then they could say, well, forget this. Putting a boundary in place yourself is scary,
Right?
very
We
scary.
deserve to be able to do that. I know
Yeah.
it's hard, but we deserve to be able to do it.
Yes. I'm going to make a quick little announcement at this point, and then I'm going to move on to the next question. Is if any of you are in any groups, the ability to connect with others who are in these sorts of webinars is possible. So if you're looking to connect also with people in the groups, we do have shared emails. So it might allow you to sort of expand your group of people that you can chat with. Meta writes that estrangement is more about the estrangers than the parent. And that's an interesting statement, Meta, because that the estrangers are the one who started it for some reason, and they're not able to share clearly enough to their parents in a way that will allow space for conversation. So it says an awful lot about their pain and their difficulty talking and sharing. It says an awful lot about that. An awful lot. Stephanie here. In August, my son, whom I'm estranged from, lost his wife in childbirth. Oh, so sorry, Stephanie. That's awful. Leaving behind a newborn alone with a 2-year-old whom I had never met. I reached out to him and he responded that he couldn't handle the relationship with me and also this loss. This is excruciating for him and for me, but he will not let me help and will not answer text calls or letters. My heart is totally broken for him and I am powerless to help him or love those little girls. Sometimes I want to jump on a plane and just show up to see them, but I am trying to honor the boundaries that he set. And do I send the girls gifts for Christmas? Have no idea what to do or get rid of this grief. My goodness, that is horrible story, Stephanie. I cannot imagine having to deal with that. And it's really difficult. He has set those boundaries, and it doesn't, he set the boundaries about dealing with the relationship, but it doesn't sound like he set the boundaries necessarily for contact. I don't know if that's the case for you, Stephanie, that it's a no contact estrangement. Is it? I can see. I can see your image here. You can just shake your head for me if you want. Is it a no contact estrangement? No. So that leaves the door open a little bit, and to be able to write the letter to just, say I'm not necessarily looking for a push into this relationship. I just want you to know that I grieve for you and with you. And yeah, good. You've done that. And that whenever you're ready, I'm ready, I think would be one way to do that. Faye, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, it breaks my heart to
I know it's
what
awful.
you're going through, Stephanie. And
Yeah,
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 I'm so sorry.
that's awful, Stephanie. Yeah, it breaks your heart. Yeah, breaks our hearts to hear it. I can't imagine experiencing it. I desperately tried to do what I could over the past 8 years to keep the relationship going. It wasn't emotionally safe for me, it was killing me. Is it okay to accept and let go and stop endlessly hoping for something that hasn't happened so that I can survive? I'm still extremely depressed, but the lack of contact relieves me of the roller coaster and endless desperation for something that just isn't there and may never be there. Iris, you have to do what you need to do for your health first. Take care of yourself first. Um, the idea that it's um, not emotionally safe and it was, as you said, it was killing you. Excuse me. Um, Accepting and letting go is, I think my question would be, what are you letting go of? Are you letting go of hope or just letting go of attempting? Um, I don't, you ask here about, is it okay to stop endlessly hoping for something that hasn't happened? And even if I said, why, sure, that's fine. I don't know if you'd stop endlessly hoping. It's just a part of who we are with our children. And it's okay to hold on to hope. It's, there's, it's not fair for me or anyone to say that something will or will not ever happen. But also, if you're being compromised in your well-being in any form, you need to do what you need to do to be healthy. That is one thing that Faye and I have learned with this, is that folks who are dealing with estrangement deal with far more physical and emotional health issues than the average person, because it's a constant stressor underneath everything. It's just a buzz that's there and your body knows it. So, it's not wrong. If you need to take care of yourself, you need to take care of yourself. And if getting off the roller coaster, and you know, what Faye just said a few minutes ago was a really good way to manage the roller coaster, to be able to say, well, if we're going to do this, I'm going to set boundaries for it. Well, that's for reconciliation, but even for distancing and saying, I need to take a break. I need to have some space, or I need to do some things that are good for my health, is okay to do. You need to be okay.
You know,
Mhm.
when I look at what I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years, it is how devastating this is in all dimensions of life. And I've just done an update to the Peak Book, which should come out sometime next year. But I'm taking far more seriously an initial kind of assessment of how's this affecting us? How's it affecting us emotionally? How's it affecting our mental processes? How's it affecting our other relationships? How's it affecting our behavior? How's it affecting our physical health? And in my experience, it's impacting in most cases, at least at least 3 out of 5 of those profoundly, and probably shortening our lives. And I think that for most of us, if we were asked, somebody asked us the question, do I need to make a change in my life? Because what I'm doing right now will probably shorten my life by 3 or 4 years. I think all of us would say, absolutely. You need to make that change in your life. Your life is worth more than something that's going to take your life or reduce the quality of your life or the rest of it. This should not be a life sentence. So the only reason I say that is I think for me, I'm much more ready to look at all the impacts on my life and say, this can't go forward. I can't go forward like this, which gives me a certain freedom to take care of myself. And I hope that can happen for you too, Iris, that as you recognize these profound impacts, that your soul will feel its worth. Going back to that hymn, Carol, and that will give you the permission to do whatever you need to be okay. Not just okay, but ultimately to really thrive as a person, because that's what I think we deserve, and that's what the world needs from us.
Yeah. And we get a lot of people in our groups who will tell us that that's one of the benefits of the group is that they come away feeling like they have permission to live life again, and it's okay. Here's one, and I have, it looks like I have 12 other messages here, so probably I won't get to anything, at least anything more than that. We have a similar tragic situation as Stephanie with my daughter's ex-husband dying suddenly a year ago, September. I think she's struggling as a single parent, although she won custody of her children with his passing. I think she is taking out her grief and stress on us too, most likely. She complained we weren't helping, but she closed us out. Very sad. It is. Boy, that double message, you're not helping enough and stay away. That's just a terrible mixed message to be getting. And you, when you try to do something that's helpful, then there's something wrong with it. You didn't do it quite right, and you didn't do it at the quite right time. Very difficult. Very difficult. So Stephanie, God bless you. I'm so sorry to hear about your losses. Sending prayers and love to you. Yes. Meta, hugs of support to Stephanie and Karen. The losses you have experienced on top of estrangement is huge. We are here for you. So true. Okay. All right. I have the question. Tamara, could you please repeat that part about allowing space for conversation? Well, Tamara, maybe I wasn't listening to myself. I'm trying to remember. Allowing space for conversation. Probably the best way that I could, I probably won't repeat it the way I said it, but when I talk about leaving space for conversation, I'm talking about when two people are need to have these conversations, that it's mutual. You both have to be willing to spend the time and take that space to have conversation, and that conversation is mutually beneficial for both of you. And that comes from setting boundaries. And I know that there are people out there who can have a really, really great conversation going, but their anxiety just tops right out, and they will say to their child, this has been a really good conversation, but right now I can't tolerate any more of this anxiety. Can we make an appointment to talk again, or can we get together again? And so making that space is an intentional move that you want to do. And the other way I have talked about space for conversation, and I'm, like I said, I'm not sure if I can recall what I said today, is make space for conversation with other people going through what you are going through. Be in a group, have meetups with folks that are in the same situation. I think that you will find you're not alone, and there's a lot of support there, and giving yourself permission to talk with other people in the same situation will be extremely helpful. Extremely helpful. Stephanie, thank you. It does help to share it. I so appreciate my peak support groups that I participate in. And we appreciate you, Stephanie, as well. I learned the other day that somebody was on another similar situation with another therapist, and they mentioned peak in that, and I was like, oh boy, that's really great. I appreciate that. Meta, I recommend the book Ambiguous Loss by Pauline Boss, as estrangement is unresolved grief. Yes, it is. And it is ambiguous grief. In my book, Relation Snip, I talk about grief of estrangement, and there's 4 different kinds of grief that estranged parents deal with all at the same time. And so that anything that you can learn about grief is important, because that is a big part of what's going on in your life, is grieving. And it's a disenfranchised grief. What do you place it on? There isn't a death. You might not even be clear about why you've been estranged. And that's what disenfranchised grief is about, is where you really can't put a finger on that loss. Catherine Parker, for the first time after 10 plus years of this estrangement, on Thanksgiving, I forgot to text my daughter to say happy day. I was all by myself enjoying the day and I just forgot. That's progress. Yes, that is progress, Catherine. Although I have to admit that when I remembered, I could feel a little bit of guilt, but I was able to quickly let that go. Yay.
Yay!
Yes. Boy, there's nothing that a therapist loves to hear any more than I was able to let go of the guilt. That was I really enjoy that. And it really is progress for sure. You whatever work you have been doing, Catherine, it's working. And I think that that's wonderful. I'm glad that you were able to do that. Um, yeah, that is progress. No doubt about it. Um, next one is here. Thank you, Kelly. Could a parent send estrangement information to the estranged child? You could. You could. I'm not exactly sure how that would be received. And I don't really know. I don't have any statistics on how much research estranged children are doing on the topic. Estranged parents are doing a lot. They're doing a lot of searching for information and for groups and for people in the same situation as them. But I don't know what the kids are doing. I do know somebody okay. I do know that from what I've seen on YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, where's the other and some of the other groups on Facebook, not just our Facebook, is that there's a lot of anger out there.
Mhm.
The things that I see are anger, 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 anger. And that's okay if you're angry, but if you're telling it to the world and you're not talking with your parent about it, it isn't helping. It is not helping. And so being able to have that conversation with your children is really important. And if you're not given the opportunity to do that, then you're really in a powerless situation, and getting your power back is part of the recovery process. Part of it is setting boundaries and making choices for your life that are about you and your health and you moving forward. So that is really important piece of the whole thing, is recognizing that you can set those boundaries to move forward for your own health and well-being. I think this is the last thing I see on here. Oh, let me finish answering that though. Could a parent send estrangement information to the estranged child? I think I would be careful about what I sent. I think I would want to be sure it's balanced and that it doesn't put blame on either party, which is one of the very strong tenets that Faye and I believe in, is that the no fault in the situation. Everybody has their role in that. So I would be careful about what you sent, and be prepared that it could cause more problems, even if it's done with the best of intention.
Well, and that's I think too, because the communication process gets distorted, as we so often talk about, and what you intend to say is not what's heard. You can send something that would be, to an objective observer, totally balanced, but it may not be read that way.
That's right.
It may not be heard that way.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think I would generally say to be cautious
Mhm.
about sending information. Like some people have said, "Can we send your book to our kids?" And I'm like, I don't recommend that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when you say that, Faye. I have this a parent that I was working with, and I wasn't working with this person on estrangement, but talking about the filters that we hear things through, how we hear things. And so I said to the person, or that person said to me when I said something back, I answered a question and I said yes. And they looked at me and I said, you look confused. What am I confusing you? And they were like, what did you mean by that? And I said, yes, I'm not quite sure what your question is. So as the conversation went on, what I actually said to the person is, what do you hear when you hear me say yes,
Mhm.
yeah, and yup? And the answer I got back was, I hear yeah, yup, yes. And so that's not at all what I intended, but that's what they hear. And that's what we were working on, is that. So what does someone hear is really difficult to know. And you're going to feel really hurt if you do something with the best of intentions and they hear, yeah, that's the challenge. I see that Faye has put up that donate button for people who had asked for that. So please feel free to use that if you wish, but it's certainly not a requirement of this group. This group we said was free, and it is free. And Tamara, thank you for this meeting. It is really helpful and great information. Thank you, Tamara, for being here. Appreciate that. Not for us so much as it is for the whole group, and to know that there's a group of us that are all supporting each other here. And we will be meeting again a week from tonight at 7 o'clock, same link. I will do my best to send out the reminder and not send the wrong one when I send it out on Constant Contact. If any of you saw that tonight, I sent the wrong one and then had to send a second follow-up. So
I would just add one thing.
sure thing.
Going back to the kind of spiritual nature of the season. Because the last year's been pretty difficult for me. I found, like, in my community, a couple of different healing services.
Mm.
I went to them every week, and every week I went up and asked to be prayed for in 2 services. So I just encourage people to take advantage of whatever your faith tradition, taking advantage of opportunities for healing, whatever again that might be and what it looks like. But I know within the Christian tradition, there are churches that have healing services every week, communion with healing prayers.
Mhm.
And I just encourage people to take advantage of those opportunities for healing.
Yeah. Thank you, Faye. Thank you so much. All righty. Well, we will say good night then. Thank you all. Your kind words. I see them all in there. Take care, and we'll see everybody in a week.